Hello and welcome to our Strategic Compass. We are very happy today because we are joined by former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, Mr. Nabil Fahmy. Mr. Fahmy, Your Excellency, thank you very much for joining us today in our program. And as I mentioned during in our communications, we are going to be talking about Trump's foreign policy assertions, particularly on the Middle East and Gaza. And we would like to hear your reactions to what he said and what he's insisting on, actually. Remember when we were at Valdai in early November, everyone was first talking about the whether or not Trump was going to win and what he's going to do and say. Now he's back in the White House and he's made a lot of foreign policy assertions, some of which are particularly about the Middle East, and there has been quite a lot of reactions from the region, including from Egypt. Now, what is your first reaction? What is your take on what he says, on what he proposes actually to do with regard to Gaza?
Well, first, let me thank you for the kind invitation to come out with you. It's always a pleasure to engage with Turkish audiences in particular.
That's our pleasure, Mr. Minister, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Trump is, by definition, by desire, by his own branding, non-conventional, out of the box, the antithesis of what you would expect from a person in that particular position. So I'm not surprised that his style is different from the normal. That's my first point. My second point is this is the second time that Trump was elected. Therefore, I don't look at this as a fluke. I actually see it as indicative of a direction in America. And that's something one needs to look at deeply. On Gaza, the proposal basically to empty Gaza of its people, send them to 8, 9 different countries, including my own, Jordan, etc., and make it into a tourist resort is illogical. Let me rephrase that. It's absurd, it's illogical, and it's not practical. And let me try to explain this. First of all, these people have been fighting for their land for over 70 years. Does he really think they're going to leave peacefully and go in other places? That's my first point. Secondly, in what capacity does America expect, President Trump expect, that he would own Gaza after that, which is what he said. To own it, you have to buy it from somebody or lease it from somebody. Is he going to lease it from the Israelis? They're an occupying power. So he would become the occupying power. Or is he going to lease it from the Palestinians? And I emphasize that they're not ready to do that. Thirdly, he's openly said that this will all be done without American money and that the Arabs will pay for it. Does he really believe Arabs will finance a project that is illegal by international law? Not only international law of the criminal court, but also of the Nuremberg trials, which the Americans held after World War II, which specifically says that the mass displacement of people from their territories is a violation of international law. So it just doesn't make any sense at all. Now, he's moved back a little bit from his comment, but his comments are nevertheless very serious and need to be taken very carefully because they give the Israeli extreme right a lot of room to maneuver and confidence that they will be supported by America. And they've already said that they want the larger Jewish state to include parts of Egypt, parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria, parts of Iraq, parts of Jordan, besides Gaza and the West Bank. That's not a policy that will help peace in the region. Now, you asked about our reaction, or let me add to it, our reaction. We've opposed that for multiple reasons. Egypt will not support or participate in any process that directly or implicitly leads to the de-Palestinization of the territories. That is inconceivable from our historical responsibility, and it's inconceivable in terms of our determination that rule of law should prevail, not the rule of power. So we will not do that. If we're faced, will we be faced by pressure? I'm sure we will. I'm sure there will be pressure. But what is helpful is that, grosso modo, all of the world seems to oppose this as well. I really never heard a single foreign leader, besides the Israelis, saying that this is a logical process. So I'm concerned we're going to get into a tug of war with the Americans, but we have said this is historically unpalatable for us, and it affects our national security. So it's a very serious issue. But more so, I'm concerned by the political room it provides the Israeli right and the right wing across the world in this effort.
Well, Mr. Minister, I mean, you talked about the Arab states' reaction, indeed their combined opposition to this so-called proposal, alongside the worldwide opposition almost by all the states. Now, I mean, you are an experienced diplomat and at the same time an academic. You are emeritus rector of the American University in Cairo. Now, what is your sense that this time the Arab world is going to actually determinately oppose this? Okay, this is given the Israelis a lot of hope for what they could actually with impunity, but at the same time, in the face of determination on the part of the Arab world, I mean, they can't basically get away with impunity with what they have in mind, would they?
Well, what I expect to see in the next few weeks is heightened tensions, political tensions. I'm not talking about military, political tensions between America and the Arab world. Our foreign minister arrives in Washington today, actually, and the president has talked already with President Trump, our president. The Jordanian king also arrives for a meeting with President Trump very, very soon. And over and above that, besides all the statements issued in the Arab world, the Israelis recently just said, Saudi Arabia has a lot of territory. Why don't they go and stay there? And that has led to a tremendously angry reaction as well. So the Arab world is going to speak out very strongly. And ultimately, if it has to, will take actions to resist this process. The Arab world since 2002 and before, for that matter, has been pursuing peace. But it's peace based on justice and based on law. It's not based on the force, the prevailing force at a point in time. So the Arab world wants peace, but it's not going to give up its national security.
Well, there is the national security considerations on the part of the Arab world, but there is also the dignity of the Arab world. I mean, could any of the Arab state and any Arab government ever give in to any such proposal? Because the Palestinian issue is sometimes also considered as part of their how shall I say, legitimacy, in popular talk.
I know what you're saying. I don't raise the issue of dignity because it's a given for me. The proposal is a non-starter.
Mm-hmm.
One, because of national security issues, but secondly, because we have historically supported Palestinian rights. And if we were to give in to the logic of force, then you will have further violence pursuing in the region. And I mentioned to you that the Minister of Finance of Israel has said that he wants a larger Jewish state, including part of Egypt, part of Jordan, part of Lebanon, part of Syria, part of Iraq, and part of Saudi, by the way. So it's a very dangerous road to pursue. And what we're trying to tell people, including the Americans, we want peace for everybody in the Middle East, including Israel. But it is peace through resolution of the conflict, not through force of arms.
Well, in the case of the American and Israeli collaboration, they are quite closely collaborating on the issue, on everything regarding Israel. Would you think, is it your sense that, either Israel, possibly Israel would resort to violence against the Gaza people of Gaza after they have committed an obvious genocide, to basically force them out of the region one way or the other under American, how shall I say, guidance or protection?
Let me make 2 points here. I said at the beginning that I expect tension between the Arab world and the new American administration in the next few weeks and months, because to back off, it's going to be a tough tug of war. Secondly, I'm not underestimating American power. That being said, and we are close friends of America in Egypt, as are many Arab countries. But that being said, when the Americans decided to invade Iraq, we stood up and said no. And the Americans were not happy with it. But because the danger of invading foreign countries is greater than, strategically, than any short-term consequences, even material consequences. So I'm not at all worried that the Arab world will take a stand. And again, I would hope it is an extreme political stand. I don't see anybody in the Arab world wanting to go to war. But if the Israelis use force beyond their borders, then they are the ones violating international treaties, including our own, by the way, with them. And if they use increasing force, once again, in Gaza, then the Gaza ceasefire will break down, and the anger against Israel will increase again, and the cycle of violence will ultimately repeat itself. And let me be very candid here. We shepherded the negotiations for the Gaza ceasefire out of a humanitarian concern for the Palestinians on the ground, for the hostages and incarcerated on both sides, but also with the worry that if you continue to allow this cycle of violence, it will get out of hand. Regrettably, we've seen Israel use force all over the Middle East over the last year and a half, increasingly so. But if we fall back into that dire consequence, then there will always be a heavy price to pay. Again, I'm not threatening anybody. But when the Egyptian president says this affects our national security, he is then highlighting the most important element, one that we never allow to be put at risk. Now, I also see there will be pressures on other Arab countries by the American administration, but hopefully when they get a better understanding that this is not a minor issue, they will back off this rather strange proposal.
Well, logic suggests that we should have been talking about the a Palestinian state coming up these days, with Trump back in the White House and blah, blah. Okay, the war has come to an end. The process of hostages deal is in process that's going on. And we should have been talking about a Palestinian state one way or the other. But instead, we are talking about wild scenarios, breaking up and then breaking through all the lines of peace and turning the region into all these wild scenarios once again. Now, do you think, if the Americans if the Americans are insisting on that, the Israelis, particularly the Israeli radical right wing, would love that. And do you think that would be the end of the Abraham Accords peace process too? Because how would you negotiate the Abraham Accords under the circumstances?
Well, let me be direct and careful at the same time. The reality is there will be consequences. Any attempt to expand the Abraham Accords will fall on deaf ears. There's no question about that. The initial target, or if you want, the golden ring that has been pursued in the Abraham Accords, is to add to it a Saudi component. That's not going to happen. It didn't happen post October 7th because of the devastation from October 8th onwards. And it's not going to happen in an environment where Palestinians are being forcefully or aggressively pushed out of Gaza. The Saudis have said openly, we want peace, we want a two-state solution, and that will open the door for what we said in 2002, that end of occupation will allow for peace between Israel and all of the Arab countries. So we are going to go through a difficult phase because the initial step by President Trump has essentially encouraged the right in Israel even more. And I would argue or question, take it any way you want, whether the proposal made by Trump is his proposal or something coming from the extreme right in Israel or the evangelical right in America. One has to look at this very carefully. In either case, it is not going to work. Now, we want peace. We started the peace process, but we will not sacrifice Palestinians.
How would you explain, for instance, to the third parties? It seems, of course, in terms of international law, international norms, and whatever, the United Nations system and what have you, any proposal of this sort is illegitimate. It is unacceptable. It cannot be even, talked about, floated around. It cannot be done. But sometimes, how would you explain it to the third parties who would say, well, Egypt has a lot of territory, Saudi Arabia has a lot of territory, it's all about 2 million or just around a little more than 2 million people. They could easily house them, and the problem would be sorted out, or the problem would sort itself out. To the Turkish public, of course, this is something unacceptable. So the Turkish public would understand, and it has always understood the grievances and all the sufferings of the Palestinian people. There's no question about that. Turkish politicians, no matter how government is in power, would never condone that. But to some third parties, how would you explain that? If this is done, then what sort of norms and regulations and international law we would be talking about?
I do it very simply. First of all, Palestinians have been trying to defend their homes, their houses for over 70 years. the idea that they prefer another home, it's simply, there's no logical basis for that. It's not an issue of, is there space anywhere else? Of course there's space in other places. There's also space, by the way, in the West Bank and in the Negev and all that. But I'm not arguing about that. I'm arguing that you should not displace them anywhere, whether it's from Gaza to the West Bank or vice versa, or even from Gaza to the Negev in Israel. It's not a matter of space. It's a matter of rights. That's my first point. Secondly, if we start accepting that force should be the criteria for determining any measure, then with every shift in the balance of forces, you would have violence again. That's why I want to apply a standard. The standard is international law. And by the way, the establishment of the State of Israel by the UN, not by anybody else, identified two states, Israel and Palestine. So part of the decision on Israel included a Palestinian state, so that they have a right to their state in those territories is paramount. So again, it's not about finding space anywhere around the world. Would anybody want to be forced to leave his home somewhere else by somebody else's determination, only because there's more room? Doesn't make any sense. Again, this is not, I mean, to go to your point clearly, it's not a real estate transaction. It is a historic right and a determination that you have to make strategically to ensure a consistent peace and security.
And how would you expect the Europeans react to that? Actually, now, because of, again, Trump's foreign policy assertions, the Europeans don't seem to be terribly happy about all of that. Indeed, they are also discussing among themselves.
I think what needs to be said here is we all need international norms to be respected, because some states are more powerful than others, and we cannot make violence to be the determining factor. So I expect the Europeans will be supportive in their opposition to this proposal. And I would hope that they make that position very, very clear. But I think this is what Trump is all about. He said, I'm different, and I will deal with all of you differently. So that people are agitated is not really surprising. What's surprising is there's no historical context for what he's suggesting, whether it applies to Europe or, for that matter, to the Middle East. I'm not debating some details like whether Europe covers 2% of their budget for defense or not. These are technical issues. What I'm really talking about is what kind of word are we talking about? Now, I'll tell you one thing which I actually like about Trump, and there aren't that many. I actually like the fact that he doesn't want long processes. He wants resolution of things, and he wants to engage his adversaries. This is what diplomacy is all about. But you cannot solve international problems only from your local mindset. And even his local mindset in America is different from what America has been talking about for years. So I expect Europe to say no, but I would hope that they say no more forcefully than they have in the past.
And other international actors like Russia, China, who have been, quite opposed and vociferously so to the Israeli use of force against the Palestinians in Gaza and all that. I mean, would any of that help, Trump to step back from his position in?
I think so. Again, Trump, by his own description, is essentially a businessman or a deal maker. He likes to get deals done. To get a deal done, you have to negotiate strongly, but accommodate your counterpart as much as is needed to reach a deal. So I would argue that he can talk the talk, but he can't walk alone because he won't get deals. If countries act strategically, because the minute you start violating the basic tenets of law, you risk putting yourself at risk of a balance of power. And the balance of power, be that military, wealth, or political, is of course movable, changes, and is presently in Trump's favor. He knows that, and that's fine because it's obvious for everybody. But at the end of the day, it's not a zero-sum game. Both sides have to find resolution here.
And just short questions about bilateral relations between Turkey and Egypt. You know, when the Egypt-Turkey relations basically were severed off in 2013, I think you were the Minister of Foreign Affairs, yes. And then you yourself and many other people basically worked hard to bring back the relationship to normal. Now we understand that the relations seems to be going well with both presidents having visited their respective capitals and so forth. What is your take on that?
First of all, I'm very glad that it's happened. It was not a pleasant time when we were pulling at each other. But Turkey for Egypt is a very important country. And we are not at all sensitive about competition. Legitimate competition is normal, as is the case vice versa. Mm-hmm. If we were competing for something that Turkey is interested in, as long as we don't try to impinge upon the national security of the other side. And I actually think, and I'm one of the people who have been saying this in Egypt for years now, you cannot get security and stability in the Middle East unless Turkey and Egypt have a well-managed relation because of our different influences throughout the Middle East. There are the two presidents have opened the door for lack of a better term, a new beginning. And it started off reasonably well. We've actually consulted quite seriously. Most recently, our foreign minister was also in Turkey and discussed a lot of regional issues. But I would encourage much more institutional engagement. Different government institutions need to talk to each other, need to understand each other, because there are some areas of sensitivity, and we really need to move this region forward to the mutual benefit of both sides.
And last short question about Egypt's relations and also cooperation and collaboration with Greek Cyprus as well as Greece during that period when the bilateral relations was deteriorating between the two countries. Cairo moved closer to Greek arguments in terms of the maritime dispute and what have you in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, how do you assess Egypt's relations with the Greeks, both with Greek sure. Cyprus and Greece? Because what we have, ideally, we would love to have Egypt not necessarily taking part or taking side in this dispute. And Egypt has always been like that.
Well, you're asking the right person, because I was the one behind all that. Mm-hmm. But the point I made then, which is reflected in all of our agreements with Greece and Cyprus, and the points I made then, even in the tension between Turkey and Egypt, was that Egypt should not do anything that negatively affects the Turkish people or that is sensitive to Turkish body politic. We had problems with a particular kind of leadership in Turkey at the time, and we've moved on from that. But we made those 2 points because we saw the importance of Turkey. We were not going to do something that was fundamentally in conflict with Turkey's interests. Therefore, we did not engage in any of the sensitive issues that Turkey was concerned with, particularly in its neighbors and all that. Secondly, all of our agreements with Greece and Cyprus have a clear provision there that I put in, that this is not against anybody else, and it does not exclude anybody else. We made that point clear, and we're not playing the game of X versus Y, Y versus Z. I need all of you. But there were points in tension, and therefore we needed to sort of show that we had larger interests, but they are not in any way prohibitive to engaging both sides. I would like, frankly, to see a more direct engagement between Egypt and Turkey on the maritime issues, especially regarding our western border and the Libyan situation. So yes, we did that, and I'm the one responsible for that. I don't shy away from that. But never will you see something that directly affects Turkey's national interest or that excludes Turkey.
Well, we need all of us, as you said, Mr. Minister, in this region, in this part of the world. Thank you very much for joining our program.
Thank you,
today.
Professor.
And hope to see you in one of these international gatherings again.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Well, thank you very much for watching us. We'll get back to you with another topic and another expert to analyze the regional and international issues. Bye-bye for now.
Goodbye.